Hello everyone. Bread Ambassadors are really happy to welcome you all here at the Apprentice Center at Montmichel Saint-Mercure. Thank you for this conference that is also live, streaming live and translated in English. The theme is baking techniques for health nutrition. It is something that is very dear to us. We've been working for 15 years on the topic, and we have discovered a method called Respectus Panis, taking into account the nutritional values of bread, but also the environmental aspects. We wanted to share this with professionals, but also a larger audience. Bread ambassadors are precursors of baking techniques for professionals and to share knowledge. This conference is made for creating exchanges. To talk about the topic, we have GPs, nutritionists, scientists, and they will share their knowledge with us. And we also called professionals who will share their daily lives. I will now give the floor to Sébastien Mignot, who will moderate this conference. Thank you very much, Dominique. Hello, everyone. I wish you a good conference, and I have the duty of moderating this roundtable of passionate people. The topic is baking techniques for health nutrition. It is quite a complex topic. We will try to get some practical insights for our companies and to share different and various perspectives. The goal is to give you some information and for you to be able to adapt then, once you're back in your own company, to be able to share this with your clients. Therefore, we have quite a rich roundtable this morning. We have somebody who is not here with us but is online. It's Anthony Fardet. Hello. He's with us thanks to networks. He is agri-food engineer and doctor in human nutrition. I'm quite short, but you will be able to complete this. Then we will have Dr. Pascal Goncalves, who's a general practitioner. He's now working on preventive medicine based on health, on food, and physical activity. He is the author of a Beto Santé training that you can find online. Then we'll have Caroline Masson, who is milling and baking consultant on nutritional aspects. Then we will have Sylvain Cabane, who will share his practices. He works in Vertou. We will then have Thomas Planchot, that everyone knows here, because he's from here, craft baker, also MOF, so best craft worker in France. We will then have Mr. Remesi, who's a former research director at the INRA Institute and who wrote a few books. We will try to keep him within a short amount of time. Then we will have Amandio Pimenta, who is also quite well-known, consultant trainer and MOF as well. He will share his perspective on these nutritional aspects. The rules are clear. You have 15 minutes each. Yes, Mr. Goncalves. Anthony Fardet, you will be the one to start. I will now give you the floor, and I wish you a fruitful discussion. Can you hear me well? Great, so it would be great if you could show my slides, please. In the meantime, hello everyone, thank you for your invitation. I am sorry not to be here with you today, but I have many things to be doing. I have to leave you at 10:30 because I have then another roundtable on food. I'm very happy to be with you today, especially because it is my region of origin. I'm waiting to see if the slides are displayed. So I have 15 minutes. I will try to be short and clear. I will talk to you about the basics of processing food, in particular on bread for a healthy and sustainable food, because the food matrix, the structure of a food, is a key concept, I think, for the years to come to have healthy diets. So we have redefined in 2018 the health potential of foods, because I think it's important to agree on what is a healthy food. Up until now, until very recently, it was very much based on the reductionist and quantitative approach. It's what's written on the right. In these three definitions, we have added the matrix effect. What is it? It means that two foods with the same composition but with a different structure do not have the same metabolic structure. If it's, for example, finely grinded or with breads with different crumbs, for example. So why is a matrix important? Because it plays very important roles on mastication, on chewing, on satiety, on digestive transit speed, on hormone release, on the proportion of nutrients that will be used by the organism, the glycemic index, and also the action synergy of bioactive actions. Meaning that if you have a bioactive component and add it to an ultra food, it means that this bioactive will not have the same synergy as if it was naturally present in the food. So we think you need to focus on the matrix, and that processing is extremely important because it changes the matrices. Next slide, please. You can see here a food with nutrients as black circle, and they have links in between them. So the reductionist approach focuses on nutrients, the black dots. The holistic approach is to take into account the complexity of interactions between the nutrients. If you can have the different elements that are added to this. So when this matrix is of good quality and the links between the nutrients are well respected, nutrients can have benefits for human nutrition. I like to say that the matrix governs and nutrients obey. So what's important is the links between the nutrients. Next slide, please. In the same matrix, you can see links here. We can see, for example, enzymes links or isolates, such as proteins isolates or fibers isolates or added sugars, added salt. And this matrix is degraded and artificialized. In this matrix, here, the nutrients can become deleterious. There are no bad or good nutrients, only bad or good matrices. The best the matrix is, the best the nutrients are. So we think we should change the paradigm. Up until very recently, we often thought that a healthy food was a nutritional food, but that's fake. Only maternal milk matches this definition. So we suggest to move towards a holistic paradigm, meaning having a food that is the least processed as possible to be edible, good, and safe. Why do we have teeth and a digestive system? It is to be able to deconstruct the matrices. Once we've understood that, we understand that matrices are fundamental. So briefly, I will talk to you about normally processed breads or not. So we have the Nova Brazilian classification, which is an empirical classification because researchers started from a cuisine, a kitchen, to base themselves on qualitative criteria. So you have food that are low or very little processed, then you have culinary ingredients that we do not consume like that. We have, for example, salt, spices, butter, oil, etc. Once you add these ingredients to the group 1 ingredients, then you have regularly processed food, where you find, for example, cheese, and 1/3 are not ultra processed. However, there is a 4th group that looks like group 3. So it's added ingredients that we do not use in kitchens. They are called cosmetic purified agents to change sensory properties of a food. Coloring, texturing, for example, sandwich loaf that imitates bread, milk or soda, aromas. So these agents are ultra-processing markers that try to imitate real foods. So we have a lot of ultra-processed bread, especially in supermarkets. French current bread authorizes 14 additives: acetic acid, lecithin, ascorbic and lactic acids, and the E471. And the role is to fight against blistering of crust in controlled rising and to increase the tolerance of dough to add a finer grain and texture, and to have anti-staling agents. Next slide, please. Initially, we used to have technology for bread making, and then we moved toward a different element. Bread is an example of how technology changed foods. We, for example, started selecting wheat depending on the protein value. We've added vital gluten and enzymes to increase the structural integrity of bread, of industrial products. We have changed the kneading conditions that are more intensive for porous bread with a higher glycemic index. We've added salt to a tasteless food. So we moved from a technology for food to a food for technology. So to illustrate this matrix effect that's very important for food, starchy food and bread, we have 2 different research. We've changed the density of crumb. You see the 2 patterns here. You see on the left that the most dense the crumb is, the less dense the insulin is. You can see that there is a very interesting effect for satiety. This was replicated at the INRA a few years later, and they have changed the variety of breadcrumb from 0.16 to 0.29, and by changing that, the glycemic index drops from 75 to 80 to 50%. So we see that for starchy foods, the matrix effect is fundamental. Next slide, please. Now back to ultra-processed foods and the 3V rules. We have tried to recreate links between a globalized consumption of food, a mass consumption, and food safety. If these ultra-processed foods are fine with food safety for calories and in terms of toxicity, however, food safety, health, hygiene, nutritional and environmental safety have been degraded. Once you have the markers of ultra-processing, you see that there is abuse, animal abuse, pollution, plastic, over-packaging, the use of fertilizers. All these markers are associated with monocrops, intensive monocrops, and the disappearance of farmers, small farmers. There is a high risk of early death. The interpreter apologizes, but the streaming is slow. So these foods are cheap to buy, but they threaten the socioeconomic safety because they're associated with a fragmented lifestyle, because they're eaten very fast, and the poorer socioeconomic classes eat these foods. For example, cereals for breakfast that replace breads, for example. Next slide, please. So we have elaborated in 2016 the 3V rules to characterize the relationship between food and global health. We know the ratio between animal and plant products. The streaming isn't working. So there are 3 dimensions. There is a fundamental hierarchy, meaning based on plant products. When we choose one food, the first rule is the V that says vrai, meaning real, so that nutrients can be brought to the organism, and it needs to be based on plant-based products and real products. The composition effect then reflects the nutritional aspects of nutrients. So the matrix governs the health effect of nutrients. These 3 rules is within the agri-food chain. The producer provides nutrients to a population. That's his first objective. Ils sont pareils, je crois. So the processing agent in the middle of the chain value, of the value chain. In France, we consume too many animal products. Anthony, I don't know if you can hear us. Anthony, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We have connection issues, and unfortunately, we can't hear you properly. Is there anything that you have maybe that's turned on that can use your network? Or maybe we need to reconnect? It's a shame because we can't follow what you're saying. Anthony, hello, hi. So we went back a few slides when it started being a bit complicated to follow you. Now I give you the floor. I start here again. So as I was saying, these 3V rules are within the agri-food value chain. The producer, be a farmer, agriculture, provides nutrients to a population. It's his first objective. But if we don't take into account, in the middle of the chain, the processor, that was neglected up until now, underestimated, if this transformator, a processor, does not create real food, then the nutrients that are brought will not be able to be used for benefits. So it's important that processors do not change what producers create, that is organic, local, etc. So a processor has an essential role to bring quality foods to consumers and to have a quality production. How can we replace animal products? Because in France we eat about 40% of animal calories daily, which is way too much. We should divide it by 2. How can we replace these products? Ideally, it would be by grains and seeds because they're good for health, they're sustainable, and they are under-consumed in France, under 15 grams per day, legumes, cereals, and oleaginous seeds. And to consume animal products that respect animal welfare. We here summed up a flexitarian diet. So to choose cereal products, we have a tree here to make decisions to protect global health, to separate real cereal products from ultra-processed cereal products who have ultra-processing markers, aromas, that have puffing, extrusion cooking with ultra-processed and fiber carbohydrates associated with increased risk of chronic diseases. In real cereal products, we need to take into account ripening, refining, so use mostly whole foods, and not to have too many added salt, sugar, and fats, because studies and research have shown that adding such elements are associated with higher risks of weight intake and type 2 diabetes. The key issue for food technologists is to preserve food matrix in the best possible way. So here you have a 3V plate with the level of processing and with, in brown, animal products. I will let you have a look at this plate. I can send you the slides. And you can see the 3V rule. You can find it in the Manger Vrai book. You can see that eating well for global health is actually quite simple. As long as you have a holistic approach. It's important to keep these three dimensions in mind, not only the ratio of animal and plant products and diversification, but based on the processing level. Two indicators can be used. So the NOVA classification and the SIGA index. There's three under rules. You should always favor solid foods, whole starchy foods in comparison to refined, and to limit added salt, sugar, and fats. There's nothing more to know. So for breads, so for the take-home messages, the matrix effect of bread should be preserved to be safe and sustainable. And we have two extremes today: the sourdough bread, stone milling, organic, versus the industrial white bread, which is the worst because there are high discrepancies between the glycemic index, the density of crumbs and satiety, a longer conservation, a higher nutritional density, better taste, less salt. For those who want to know more about it, many books have been published. You can contact me if you wish to know more. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for your presentation. That was really interesting. Could you hear me? Yes, we could understand you. Your conclusion is very interesting, and your summary as well, with the plate, the 3V plate. As a micro conclusion for us bakers, I think the interest and the message for our customers is that we need to produce low processed breads because they are richer, and we have to tell them about the environmental impact that is also linked to nutrition. This is something that is quite holistic. That was very interesting. Thank you. What is important is to avoid processed food. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best for your next round table. Yes, that's a big day. Thank you. Thank you very much. Goodbye. We are now going to switch to a second doctor, Mr. Goncalves, who will talk about his method and his vision of food and health. Is everything all right? So now you have the microphone. Can you hear me? Yes, that's good. You will be able to see the slides here, so you just stay where you want to be. I need to move, actually. I will talk to you about the position of bread in a healthy diet. So first of all, we will define what is real bread, and then we will define what is a healthy diet. In my practice, sometimes I have people that tell me, "Doctor, I will stop eating bread." We know that bread makes people fat. And then I ask them what kind of bread they're eating. It's good bread, it's whole grain and with a Nutri-Score. Oh, very good. I'm reassured. But you know that this is not bread. How so? I've heard that it's whole grain flour. I'm hearing that all day. So how can some people make the confusion between your work, your bread, and this kind of bread? Well, this is the answer of food processing that was said by Mr. Fardet. The NOVA classification that has been mainstreamed in France thanks to Mr. Fardet, has 4 categories: Nova 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm insisting because this Nova classification for the processing of food is the key. If you don't understand this, then you cannot understand why we got there. So the Nova classification for the 1, it's unprocessed and minimally processed food. Nova 2, processed culinary ingredients. Nova 3, processed foods, that is to say, foods that are processed simply, and the 4th one, ultra-processed foods. So how do we obtain a processed food? That is to say, a simply processed food, Nova 3. We're using a Nova 1 food with a culinary ingredient, Nova 2, and we obtain a Nova 3 food. If we apply that to bread, we will use flour and a culinary ingredient, which is salt, and we create a simply processed food, which is bread, flour, water, salt, and sourdough. This was before, in the past. But now we have that kind of food, and here you can see that the soft bread without crust is far from flour, salt, water, and sourdough. Here we have natural flavor, vinegar, bean flour, emulsifiers, and we can see that there's something that is not clean, that is fishy between Nova 3 and Nova 4. So how can we do to make the difference between the authentic, the genuine bread, Nova 3 bread, and the Nova 4 ultra-processed bread? So I have something very easy for you. Real bread can be bought only at a real baker. It seems obvious. And you can smile, but this is the situation we've reached. So if we go back to the Nova classification about the processing decrease, you just have to count the number of ingredients. A Nova 1 food has most of the time only 1 ingredient, so it's very easy to understand. A Nova 3 food has between 2 and 4 ingredients, so it's still easy to understand. And an ultra-processed food will have more than 5 ingredients, and some of them are being very difficult to understand. This is valid for bread, but for all the packaged food that you're buying. And what you have to know is that when there are more than 5 ingredients in some food you've bought, you have 75% of risk to facing an ultra-processed food. And if we go back to our example of the bread, this Nova 3 bread with flour, water, salt, and sourdough is very easy to understand. In the fake bread, Nova 4 bread, here you have more than tens of ingredients, with some of them not clear at all. So the real bread, the genuine bread, is the Nova 3 bread. It is the one that we're talking about when we're talking about real bread. We've talked about bread. Now we are going to talk about a healthy diet. I'm not talking about a diet as a diet to lose weight. When I'm talking about healthy diet, if you ask a doctor about a healthy diet, they will tell you a healthy diet is a diet that is close to the Mediterranean diet. A healthy diet is close to the Mediterranean diet. When I tell that to my patients, they are telling me, yes, I'm using olive oil. Yes, you can drink a bottle of olive oil every morning. You won't be practicing the Mediterranean diet. It's not working this way. It's much more than this, actually. To be simple, the Mediterranean diet is based on the consumption of cereals, fruit, vegetables, legumes, nuts, and we need to have a moderate consumption of fish, poultry, yogurts, and cheese, and to limit our consumption of meat and the main source of fat is olive oil. So if I want to sum up the main principle of this diet, it means that we have to eat more vegetable products and less animal products. And the Mediterranean diet specifies something. We have to have a very varied diet and, if possible, eat seasonal products. It comes from another time when there were no transformed or almost no processed food. But today, we have to specify that we have to eat true food. So, you're eating true, vegetable, and varied. Doesn't it ring a bell? It's the 3V rule. Vegetable, true, and varied, that was mentioned by Anthony Fardet before. A healthy diet is a 3V diet, so it's a modern Mediterranean diet. So this is a healthy diet, and now we can use the 3V to eat in the daily life, but also to choose which kind of bread we are going to eat. So I'm not going back to what a real bread is. The 3V bread is a Nova 3 bread. It's a vegetable product. It's made of flours that come from cereals and grains. And this quality of bread will vary if we're using sourdough or yeast, but also according to the type of flour that we are using. A sourdough bread will be more tasty than a yeast bread, and it's the same with the quality of the flour. If you're using a whole grain flour, it will be different from white flour. You've heard that you have to eat something with whole grains. So you have to go back to the grain. It's bran, the endosperm, and the germ. This is the whole grain. And a refined cereal is only left with the starch that has been degraded. And with this process, by taking off the bran of this grain, we've lost parts of the fibers, the minerals, the nutrients. So we have to reduce our consumption of white flours, because when we are eating it, we're losing a part of the benefits of bread. The third V, varied. It's great to eat bread. It's easy to eat a varied diet because there are many different types of cereals and many types of bread. And now I want to stop for a few minutes. I know I've got enough time. I want to tell you a story. One day, my wife told me, "Oh, you will be very happy, darling, because you're going to a bread workshop with the children." I was really happy with my 2 children, 8 years old, 6 years old. And a lovely lady explained to us what was going to happen from the field to the bakery. And at some point she presented wheat grain. So she asked the children if they knew any other types of cereals. A child said, yes, the cereals that are round with a circle in the middle, the round ones with honey, and the square ones that are with chocolate. And then I understood, for this child, the diversity of cereals was just this. The breakfast cereals. So what we have to understand is that we've reached that point today. Obviously, this child was not mine, but still. The other advantage of bread on top of the variety is that it needs no preparation when we're buying it, so it's a very easy way to eat varied, vegetable, and true, and to diversify our consumption. In total, a healthy bread, a 3V bread, is a true bread that is whole grain with sourdough and we try to vary it as much as possible. It doesn't mean that it has to be whole grain bread every day, but we have to find the right balance between white flour and whole grain flour. Do you know the first signal that is sent to your brain when to say that you're eating? It's chewing. It means that the first signal, you are chewing and you are saying to your brain that you're eating. Why am I talking about this? Because we moved from a genuine bread with a thick crust and dense crumb, and then we transformed it into soft bread, and then we did it with we switched to a soft bread without crust. So what's the next step? Soft bread without crumb? It makes no sense. Soft bread without crust will never be good for health. What about salt now? As you know, salt is one of the ingredients in bread. What you have to understand is that there are two types of salt, the visible one and the hidden one that you will find in the Nova 3 and 4 categories of processed foods. And if we go to the Nova 4 hidden salt, so all the ready-made meals, the industrial soups, cold cuts, cheese and bread. What you have to know is that it's because the dough is not tasty enough that modern bakery is using that much salt. And when we have craft bakers that are doing their work properly and establishing methods to reduce the consumption of salt, well, that is what you're finding in the charter of the Respectus Panis method, because they are acting on the kneading time, on the flour, and they don't need as much salt. And obviously the bread is better and healthier. As a conclusion, I will show you that we often talk about health, nutrition, but when we are eating fake or ultra-processed food, then it has a big impact on our health, on the earth health, on the craft workers, on health. As Dr. Fade was saying before, the consumption of ultra-transformed food has repercussions on our health. Overweight, diabetes, high blood pressure, early death, cancers. Even a study said that it could increase the number of deaths if we were eating a lot of, or mostly, processed foods. And when we're talking about the planet, in order to obtain Nova 4 ingredients, these ingredients are obtained by cracking, and cracking uses a lot of energy. It's bad for the planet. And where do these cereals come from? They come from intensive monoculture. To have such cultures and crops, we're using a lot of pesticides, fertilizers, water, and we're deforesting. So we are killing biodiversity, and by consuming ultra-processed food, we're encouraging this process. And obviously there's a difference between both breads. The packaging, ultra-processed food are very often packaged with a lot of packaging layers. They are over-packaged, and this has an impact on the planet. And most of the time, the ingredients are imported from the other side of the world. And now, our craft bakers and the local producers, if we want to go on having quality food that are tasty, we need to have local producers and farmers that can do their job properly, that can rotate the cultures, preserve biodiversity, and you need to have people like you, craft bakers, that want to process food in a normal way for health benefits for the population. And if we want all these people to live decently, then it's up to us consumers to make the right choices. And we still have the choice. But we are at the turning point. If we want to make sure that our children can go to the bakers to choose their bread, it is today that we have to start changing our behaviors. So you can see that bread and ultra-processed food have an influence on the human health, the planet health, and the culinary traditions, the life of our farmers. I have patients that are craft workers, that are farmers, and they're not doing their job for money. They want to preserve the planet health, and this is what we can see in the second part of the Respectus Panis Charter. It's better for the health, for the planet, and for the taste. So does bread has its place in a healthy diet? I'm asking you. Can you tell me? Yes, but real bread, Respectus Panis, and within a 3V diet. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. Usually we don't do it, we don't take questions now, but I think you really want to ask it, so I'm taking it now. The interpreter cannot hear the question because the speaker is not using a microphone. We have to be able to help you, and this is my role. I would like people to understand what they're eating. Usually when they know what they're eating, they will come to you. The rest is not important. I really like this talk. This notion of true bread, fake bread. I think this is a simple message that is easy to transfer in the bakeries. Only to explain this, that this is true bread, this is fake bread, I think it's a real key to make people understand why they should eat craft baker bread. And this also has an environmental impact and a health impact. This is a great topic, and now we'll give the floor to Caroline. You've said it, you said the word. I don't know if my presentation is ready. In our topics of bread making and nutrition, it's one big word. Many consumers are asking us about it. So what I want to show you today is a summary of the last participative results by the INRAE about gluten. At the end of the presentation, you will have access to all the videos, because obviously in the 15 minutes I won't be able to talk about all of them. The consumers are often calling us to say, yes, I'm not eating any gluten anymore. So people are usually finding a scapegoat, which is gluten, but fortunately we have scientists and researchers that are showing that maybe gluten is not the only culprit. So we have people that say that they are gluten intolerant, celiac, allergic, sensitive, flexi. But no, I want to do like Novak Djokovic. He stopped eating gluten and he became a champion. So this is all the types of consumers that we have when it comes to gluten. I wanted to remind you that there are three main categories of people with issues with gluten. There's a disease, the celiac disease, which is a disease in which the gluten prevents them from having a good assimilation of nutrients. So for us, gluten is like poison. So obviously these kind of people are not eating gluten at all, and they're not entering any bakery. Then there are people with allergies. I know that among some of you, some people have allergies to some nutrients and some foods. So this can cause a skin rash, and that this can go up to anaphylactic shock. So then these people won't enter a bakery because a gram of flour could trigger an allergy. And now we're going to talk about those that are sensitive to gluten. So it's the SNGC, sensitivity to non-celiac gluten. So these are people that say that since they've stopped eating gluten, they are feeling better. Actually, it's going better because they've paid attention to how they were eating, because maybe in the past they were only eating Nova 4 foods. So the study allowed us to show that among these people, some people said that they were feeling better when they were eating gluten, when they stop eating gluten, but when they go buy some bread at a craft baker, they don't have any issue to digest it. So this study was entitled Gluten, Myth or Reality. So it was to do with the behaviors of the consumers that say that they are sensitive, but when they are eating bread at a craft baker's, they don't have any issue. So the scientific study relied on all the parameters that can have an influence on gluten. I won't enter into all the details. I will only let you know about the key issues. So this study is the result of 7 years of research. It was a participative research with consumers, with bakers, with scientists. I promise I won't do a lecture about chemistry or biology. But here you have to know that there are gliadin and glutenin and albumin and globulins that are present within the wheat grain. So what you have to know is that this family of proteins is playing a role as part of the matrix effect. Once we have kneaded our dough, the matrix is fixed. And here you can see the yellow links and the red links. These links are more or less solid and compact. And for those who know, it's the disulfur bridges. So they are giving some structure to the bread, and then we have to digest this structure. What is good is that we have everything we need in our body to digest this. Here you can see the different pathologies that are linked to the cereals. So it comes back to the former slides. So you can see the celiac disease, the allergies. They have issues with another sort of proteins that is included, that is contained in wheat, and then the non-celiac sensitivity. So here you have different hypotheses, and you can see a lot of question marks because we haven't targeted the proteins that trigger the sensitivity of these people. The study that I am presenting now is a study that was done in vitro, that is to say in test tubes. So it's not a clinical study. The idea was to see how gluten was digested in the test tubes. So here you can see the diagrams with the different links, solid links in bread, and the dashed links. So here we have broken some links. We have the first part, the proteins that are easily extracted. we can imagine that this protein will be more easily digested, and then there is a second category, so the proteins that are more difficult to extract. So we've had to add a solvent and a destructor to release them. So it's the yellow-orange color, and as a deduction, we know that there is a fraction of proteins that we could not extract, so they are called inextractable proteins. I want to remind you that these are only in vitro results. Obviously, science will allow to show that it's the same conclusion in vivo, but we have to remain cautious because these are only in vitro lab results, but we think that it's the same in our body. On the left, you can see what is happening in our digestive tract. And here, instead of using detergent to extract proteins, we reproduced what can take place thanks to our saliva and digestive enzymes. Once again, it's a simplified digestion model that has been used in a test tube. So we can see enzymes that allow us to digest part of the proteins, and at the bottom of the test tube we have the non-digested proteins. So you can see that on the left and on the right.
So if you look at the first result here, for a bread with the same protein intake, so for a Kraft baker bread, the fraction of easily extractable protein is largely superior to the ones of supermarket breads. I'm only using the terms that they've used in the study. So if you look at the proportion of green proteins, and these are the easily extractable ones, I think it's quite obvious here. If you look at the non-extractable portion, where does it appear? There's almost none in the Kraft baker bread, but almost 6% in supermarket bread. So with an in vitro result, we can see that there is a difference between the extraction of proteins. So what did researchers do? They've wanted to find out how a baker's bread allowed for such results. Once again, this was the chemical part, but if we reproduce digestibility in the test tube, if you look at the non-digested proteins in a supermarket bread, we reach 85%. So this is not the reality of what happens in our bodies. It's only to illustrate this discrepancy between the two breads. Why such a difference? The research explained that initially we need to start looking at wheat, flours, what happens at grinders, and the different processes. So what are the different parameters that influence this protein intake? So researchers have studied wheat species or varieties that are recommended by millers, French millers. Some varieties have been inoculated, and among some of you, we use some ancient wheat. There are maybe more typical, more regional varieties. And I think among some of you, many of you have heard or say, yes, but ancient wheat are more digestible. Here, you see the results of easily extractable proteins. On the left side, for example, for a recommended miller's wheat and ancient wheat, you can't really see much difference. You can tell that the Ronan variety has not the same portion as the Cap Horn. If you look a breeded part and a Touzel, it's different, but in average, we can't really see any results that show that this happens at the wheat level, this digestibility. But what we all hear is that ancient wheat are better. Not necessarily. It doesn't come from the variety, but how we process it. So I think you should keep that message in mind. There is a genetic variability between wheats, but there is no scientific conclusions to say that ancient wheat are better than recommended varieties. And I think this is thanks to the crafts baker work that it's more digestible. So here we will see the different parameters to explain why bread would be more digestible or not. So what they did is that they've selected 2 varieties to make it simpler, because we can't study all varieties. They have chosen a Renan variety and a bearded variety, an ancient variety. They've either chosen a cylindric grinding or a stone grinding. They've either chosen yeast or sourdough. They've either chosen a manual work and a kneader. For the diagram, either direct or initial bark fermentation, and they have also compared an ancient wooden oven and electric oven. So that's 64 different tries. You can see all the detail in the end, and there are also YouTube videos. I want to speak about the essential. What's most important is the action of fermenting agents. When we compared 100% yeast and sourdough, what we noticed that never mind the variety of wheat, it doesn't depend on the Renan or the bearded variety. We see that with only a yeast fermentation, we have no easily extractable proteins, but we see that there are still non-digestible proteins on the right. We can see that there is a real conclusion coming from this research. I'll stop soon with the numbers. So what is the most important color here? It's green, and it's the color of fermenting agents. So that means that all the other parameters, so variety, grinding, kneading, fermentation, what is the most important effect here? It's the fermenting agent, it's sourdough. What we see here is when people say ancient wheat bread is better, it's because we don't work with them with yeast. We work correctly with them. I say correctly, meaning it's real and true bread, and that's why it's much more digestible. And proteins are more easily extractable. Our superpower, it's microorganisms. So the sourdough, what you have in your bakeries, that's the treasure. You have a lot of microbiota that allow to have an easier access to these proteins. Once again, if you look at the research, you will have more details. If you know different types of sourdough, you can tell that there are much more differences as well. If I create a sourdough or a mix between yeast and sourdough and a yeast bread, and maybe there are some people who are colorblind, I'm sorry, but you can tell here that there's much more green on the sourdough bread here. So be sure of this. It is the use of sourdough with ancient wheat varieties that makes us say that it's more digestible. A crafts baker knows how to make a bread digestible. That's what you have to take home. The fermenting agent effect is the most important, the magic of our sourdough. All the links are here if you want to watch the webinars of the INRAE research. Thank you, Dominique Desclos, for authorizing me to display these results. Very interesting, enlightening, that change our perception. I think it's interesting because we can then value our methods, our craft, and I think Respect Spanish is part of this. I think it gives us some leads that are extremely interesting. Maybe we have to be the one who communicate about this instead of supermarket and industrials. I think it would be interesting to find some key concepts in this study and things that were said that were extremely interesting. Now we will have a much more practical approach with Sylvain, who is a crafts baker in Vertou. I will now give you the floor. Thank you, Sébastien. Thank you to the specialists for talking about their field. I will talk about bread. I'm Sylvain Cabane. So I work in a crafts bakery in just under Nantes. I have pictures here. I try to work quite simply with people producing and people selling. We work in a little village with a nice bakery in front of the church. We started with 4 or 5 people, and now we are about 15. Now we're 15 now. So to tell my story, I've never been mad about school. Very quickly I wanted to do something practical. I started in a kitchen. It was quite natural in France, and through this step I discovered baking. And when I discovered baking, so cake baking, I did not feel great about bakers. I was putting myself on top. And someday I passed a bakery. I had never seen such beautiful, tasty bread. I thought it was incredible. I came back and I wanted to work with him. I had a real calling. So I had 2 meetings, Thomas Blanchot, and this has changed my life. I continue to move forward, to train myself, to discover new products. It's what we see through the pictures I send. Naturally, I take pictures of my products. I like how they look. I like how they taste. Unfortunately, I limit myself to that. And I think it's the vision of many professionals. We like our products, its taste, how it looks, if we sell them or not. And we stop there. We don't think about health or nutrition. Even though it's very important, when we bake cakes, we start to see reasonable baking. With bread, it's even more important because it's something that we eat every day. The baker has a real role to play in educating their customers. Here we take the time here to discuss, but when they come to the bakery shop, we don't really have time. It's only a matter of a few seconds. So I think it's through school. In Vertou, we are lucky enough to provide for all the schools, and 3/4 is organic. And I think children, it's the best to educate children, to educate them through the bread they eat. Because unfortunately, the time for food is not considered as an education time, which is crazy if you think about it. I think we should start there, with children, and then children will convince their parents. So I continued working in this bakery. I wanted to raise two major elements for a baker, for him to do a good job or not. The first thing is recruitment. Who is around the baker? Where to find them? It's difficult in our jobs. We don't always know where to find apprentices. We think that once they are qualified, they come to us after their holidays, but we can't find anybody. I don't see anybody. I don't know where they go. We train them. I also have apprentices, and if we can, we keep them. But unfortunately, it is too random, this data. Because if you're a craft baker, it means you're a human. You need humans. We are living through a difficult time. We say it's because of COVID, but the first contest I did, that was a few years ago, Joël Menuet, the president of the contest, was we lack butchers, craft baker, fishmongers. It's always the same problem. We need to attract people in our shops and to keep them in our shops, to help them then working with us, to help them build a life. When we are a small company, we can't promise big careers, but maybe they can find truth in a respectful bread making, for the environment, a good treatment of our employees. This is maybe what we should put forward to make people understand that they are at the right place and that we need them. Then salaries. We need to talk about that. And they are linked to profitability. I'm quite happy with my career because I went in many different places. I learned how to make a lot of products. It's great. But I never learned about profitability of a product. How much does it cost to fabricate, to make, and how much to sell it? When I went to the bank, I borrowed 100,000 euros, and the banker never asked me how much I was going to sell a baguette, because I think first we start selling it at a right price, and then we can increase if it's working well. So I think it's something in our professions that we must question. We went very far with this Respectus Panis method. It's very detailed, very comprehensive. Now that we went that far with the method, we should question how much does it cost? How much can we sell them for? How should we sell them? How can we then pay our employees? I've lost my thread. So it's something we don't talk about very often, even between us. We can see that we didn't go very deep on the topic. I've met a professional who invented a software of calculating cost price to calculate our expenses, our raw materials, and how much does a product cost. I like the word holistic, what Anthony Fardet said earlier. So first, yes, how much does it cost and how much should we sell it? Because we have a training on hygiene, on technical aspects, so that we don't poison our clients. Because if they do get sick, then nobody will come to our shop anymore. But if we can't pay our employees, we will also have to close our shop. So there's a gap here. This software, this cost price software, was very important for my company to steer it in the right direction. Once we are well trained and we know the products, because there is a whole range of technical aspects to study, we have trainers, it's easy to find continuous training. But profitability, I think we need to have a dedicated training on the topic and professionals who can discuss among them. I received Journal du Pâtissier paper. We find recipes, and in the middle there is a question that was, is it profitable? And the answer was just yes. We sell a lot of them. Okay, great. So if a product was not profitable, then we should not sell it, because otherwise the debt grows as well. When I talk about that around me, I talk to bakers about it, and they say, yeah, you're right. We'll talk about it next time. But it's quite mysterious. So at my level, I try to dig in. And after working on fermenting agents, that we look into the details of profitability. Very often we oppose the industrial world and the crafts world, even though very often they move forward together side by side. And I think in the industry they've moved forward a lot more after they've taken a lot of things from us, or maybe learning from them. They have progressed and they are good at some things. We have to question ourselves. There's many improvement points. Thank you very much. Okay, the streaming is back on. We can now start again. We will now hear Thomas Planchot, who will give us his perspective and talk about his company. Then we will go back to a more scientific approach. So earlier there was a question from Pierre Nury that was addressed to you about the packagings, if you remember. We have 2 minutes here. Yes, but I think I've answered. You were talking about the marketing aspect of things, right? The interpreter apologizes, I cannot hear the question. Yes, yes. Regarding the Nutri-Score, you mean? Yes, it's something we've discussed yesterday. Unfortunately, there are some bakeries where things don't go as smoothly as with you. We can now start again. Thomas, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm a baker in the region. I'm a craft baker, and I have a company with several bakeries. So I would like to present you how I'm using the Respecto Spanish on a daily basis in my bakeries. I'm going to talk about the implementation, about the wheat sector, about the benefits, the difficulties we can meet, how it's working in the bakeries, the consumption, and how I'm thinking about Respecto Spanish for the future, how it will evolve. The implementation on a daily basis, I have a 6-year-long experience. I've been using the Respecto Spanish method for 6 years. Before that, we were thinking about the method. To date, I'm using the method with yeast and sourdough to vary the acidity rates. Some products are very difficult to make. If we want to work on nutrition, we will use sourdough. If we want regular products or products that are similar to the competition, then we are using yeast. Because some customers do not want thick crust, for instance, they want fine crust, so we have to adapt to our clients. We're working mainly with organic crops. I'm not only using organic crops, but most of them are organic. So we have the organic brown range, the whole grain range, and the nutrition one. We have a signature baguette, which is called the Tradition, and it can be available in bigger formats. So I do not have a Respecto Spanish baguette and a Tradition baguette, so it's just one for me. And so this signature baguette is available in bigger formats, as I said. I use the method partially on most of the range. So we try to express it as much as we can with a high temperature, reduced kneading times, and I think that we have to bring the Respecto Spanish spirit into what we're doing. I took over the company from my parents, and I couldn't say, okay, we're going to change everything with the Respecto Spanish. I could not change all the equipment. So we had to adapt our work to the equipment that were not made specifically to use the Respectus Panis method. So I'm reducing the temperature. I'm not doing 4 degrees anymore. I'm doing 10 or 12 degrees for the dough. I'm reducing the use of yeast. So I'm not going down to 0.5 or 0.1. I'm using flours that are as natural as possible. I'm using it for most of my range, but I'm not doing it extremely. As you said, Pierre, we are not very many bakers that can do Respectus Panis. And if we want to federate, we should not be too extremists, because then we would be too opposed to the other bakers. We had to adapt some of the equipment specifically for the proofing chambers, and I'm now equipping my labs with air-conditioned kneading rooms. Once again, we were talking about professionalism as leaders, as managers. We have to adapt our equipment. It is great to have equipment that allows us to create regular quality. We've done it for a few years, but in order to mobilize young people and the employees, we have to have the right equipment to make a good job. I've also talked about several types of fermenting. So I'm using the Respectus Panis method using slow rise. And to date, we're speaking about the quality of bread, but for the consumers, the freshness of the product is one of the essential axes of quality, even if we can question this. To date, the psychological effect of the consumer is to buy a fresh product that has just been baked, but this does not prevent this product from being shit, excuse my language. I think we have to work on how we present the product to the customers. We trained the teams, and it took us a lot of time to adjust the recipes that I've implemented in the company. I've talked about the flour sector that has to be adapted. We have to find the right partner, the right miller that has the right varieties. We were talking about varieties earlier. When we want to work locally, there are some varieties that do not work where I live in Vendée. I'm interested in this, but this cannot be cultivated near my company. So I'm working with a miller that has understood how I want to work. We have to pay attention to hard wheats that have been modified genetically and that have strong glutens. So this goes against the Respectus Panis method. For some varieties, it's something natural. For others, it's not. We have to pay attention to the enzymes that are added to flours. I want to use alpha-betamin as the natural one that is present in the flour. We don't need to add anything. So we have to use native flours. And we ask for no added gluten in the flour. The gluten is already there in the flour, so we don't need to add gluten to the flour. We can even see white wheat breads without gluten. I don't know how we can remove gluten from white wheat flour. Anyway, having native flour is essential for regularity of the products. We have to find the farmers that grow the suitable varieties. And we've seen earlier that the Rouge de Bordeaux was not necessarily, is a good variety, but it's not necessarily one that can be grown next to my bakery. So if I can buy my flowers to the local farmers, I'm happy. We need to have regular grindings. The Respectus Panis method is very different when it comes to moisture. Within the Respectus Panis method, the auto-lyse phenomenon of the dough can be disturbing, especially at the beginning. So we have to have regular grindings. We were talking about wheat varieties. What you have to know is that we can have a flour that is made with 50 different varieties. For some millers, that's not an issue. What I'm trying to require from my miller is that he uses only 1 or 2 varieties for one flour. The idea is to find a variety that is round enough. If it's good enough, then we don't need to correct it with other kinds of wheat. And we need to think about the damaged starch quantity, because this will affect the fermenting process. We also observed with time, but I'm not a scientist. Anyway, through our experience, we saw that we should not use flowers that are too old, because we can have gaps in terms of quality, and I think on the nutritional aspect as well, that would not benefit the products. We have to work to sustain the selected varieties. Varieties of flours, of wheat, or grains that we want to use in our bakeries for 3 or 4 years. I'm not an agronome expert, but anyway, I have the feeling that we have issues when it comes to finding wheat varieties that allow us to have stable quality products. And once again, I'm thinking about the Respectus Panis method that should rely on varieties that are whole grain. Some of them are too yellow, too young, and need additives. I think this leads to issues in terms of regularity. The benefits. The first benefit of the Respectus Panis method is the reduction in salt. The bread is at the 4th position in terms of hidden salt, so we have to work on this, but we have to pay attention to the acidity. By having 2 acidic products, then the product won't be accepted by some of the customers. So the good thing of the method is that we can reduce the salt quantity, and this is something that we will have to do in the future anyway. So the industrial bakers will find another way to reduce the quantity of salt. They have lots of expertise to do that. So anyway, it's something that we have to work on. The second benefit is to work pure flours. So I'm thinking about transparency towards the customers. To date, there is a real issue. It's that if we ask some bakers to say what they put in bread to their customers, maybe they wouldn't be very proud to say what there is inside. So the Respectus Panis allows us to be transparent towards our clients, our customers. I think it's one of the best methods for that, and we can also work naturally. I think towards the customer, it's a real asset. We were talking about true bread, real bread earlier. If we're using work methods that can allow us to use natural products, I think the customers will like it. we were talking about price, for instance, I think some customers are ready to pay more for more transparency. Sylvain was talking about that later. An interesting nutritional range. I want to stress the decrease in glycemia. We're talking a lot about gain weight. We're not doctors, obviously, but if we can reduce the glycemia, I think this is something that we can work on. Bread is something that can be criticized because in the last few years, some bakers did bad things. And I wanted to stress the digestibility of glutens. Caroline, you talked about that. I believe in that fully. I have the testimony of a customer that has diabetes and that buys products that are partially made according to the Respectus Panis method. So I'm using some ingredients according to this method, and this customer has a glycemia decreases when he's eating that kind of bread. So even if I'm only partially applying the method, there is some benefit. We could carry out some studies, but anyway, the best testimony we have is to have this customer telling me, I have some glycemia decrease thanks to the bread I'm buying at your bakery. Another benefit is the execution speed from the tray to the oven. I'm working at different temperatures, so we need to bring products from 4 degrees to 18 degrees. Sometimes it takes time for the different dough to start. Some flours, some concepts have everything they need to start the products. But when we work naturally, what is good is that within 1 hour and a half, 2 hours, the products are sent to the oven. For example, I'm making the Auvergnat loaf or spelt loaf, and I must say it's very convenient because it's flexible. We can bake the bread at any time. I'm preparing the Auvergnat loaf and can bake it at any time, so it's very flexible for me. That's why this method is very interesting. I'm also talking about energy savings. It's something we haven't mentioned much. We have talked about financial means savings. When we are working at 10 degrees, we are not using as much energy as for a room that is at 4 degrees. So obviously I have fewer breakdowns and issues with equipment. As you know, equipment is something that is essential. It is not always easy to have the right equipment that is working in the best conditions. We have to work on the maintenance of the equipment. So if we can avoid having technicians repair our equipment or replace our machines, then it's better. So it's less equipment, and this method is less costly. It's cheaper. When we are kneading the bread for 25 minutes, we're using more energy than when we need it for 5 minutes. Obviously, time is money, but for the Respectus Panis method, a longer time sometimes makes us earn money. And then I'm going to talk about the value of the products and the profitability later. The difficulties we've faced is the training of teams. What we are using, it's not something conventional in the training. So we have some people that are curious. Some trainers are teaching the Respectus Panis method, but usually some people are quite reluctant to the method because it has not been integrated into the baker's trainings. So the bakers are curious, but they can be reluctant to the method. They don't have the solutions. They don't know how to correct an aspect. I'm an expert, so I can support them, but sometimes they don't know what to do. Sometimes they are facing issues and they don't know how to solve them. They don't have the right remedies. And some bakers are confused. They don't have the remedies to improve the quality of the bread. So that's why I wrote Time to Adapt, to Adjust. When we've been using this method for years, we tend to forget that we've learned from our mistakes and that it took us time. It's the case for many bakers. It is important to learn from one's mistakes, to grow. So this method is the proof that we have to make mistakes to succeed. I'm often said, "Oh, Thomas, you know this method, so you know how to do it." Yes, but I've had to try many times, many things to find the right ingredients, the right method. We have to have the right flour, and it is important to highlight this product in a range that is already existing in the bakery. It's important not to have too many products, because then the Respecto Spanish product will be drawn in all the products. And I am also talking about mastering the moistures to have softer breads. Less soft bread, sorry. Respecto Spanish in the shops, the range choices, all the different ranges have to be adaptable and extended. If we have a high nutritional value product, then we shouldn't have too many of them. I know that in my bakeries we had too many products, so we've tried to target the number and reduce the number of products so that we can have a small range, but for the client they need to find all the interests they can have by choosing one sort of bread instead of another. The idea is to highlight a product in our range, thinking from a customer's perspective. Sometimes it's easier for them to take this baguette because it's softer than this one. So we have to pay attention to this. My range is now complete and it's highlighted in front of the counter. It's important to put the bread at the middle of the bakery. For years we've put them behind the shop assistants, but I think it's better to put it in front of us. Once again, to date, it's my tradition baguette. I don't need to buy a specific tradition flour. It's my tradition baguette. Once again, to manage selling Respecto Spanish products, we have to sell a lot of them by using a tradition baguette according to the Respecto Spanish method. Then it means that every time I'm selling a tradition baguette, I'm selling a product that was made according to Respecto Spanish. And I must say that this product is cheap as well. For grain products, we can also talk about foodie or gourmet products. Pierre Nourry taught me about this. It's a bread that is called Nutribio, and this is related to the pleasure aspect of the product. And I would like to say that it's also the pleasure aspect of the work of the job. It also federates all the young bakers that are interested in the baker's job. So this can also answer or be a solution to the baker's expectations. Once again, we have to keep in mind that the expectations of the bakers are not that of the clients or the customers. Maybe the customer is not interested in that method. the naturalness of the products. The glutens have to be easily digestible. It's good for the environment. We have to stand out. Why would the consumer come to my bakery? Because I'm using the Respecto Spanish method. We need to have short, catchy phrases, 2 or 3 elements per product. We have to make sure that all the shop assistants know the products very well. I'm a bit shy, so I don't like going to see the clients, the customers, but we have to go see them, to listen to them and to reassure them. This is my challenge for the future. We have to work on health, on salt decrease and on the glycemic index. There's an issue in France when we try to do good things, we are told that we shouldn't do them. And the main part also is to bring taste back at the center of the table. For tomorrow, nutritional allegations with analysis that can support it. We can do that collectively. We need to defend our brand. How can we sell this brand? It's through the collective. We have to stand out using naturalness. The industries will try to do the same, so we have to highlight that we're not using any enzymes. This method is adapted to all cereals, and we have to go further in working with the legumes. We also have to work on sustainable development. I think this method is virtuous for this. And once again, transparency. When we're buying meat, there's a label. We know which farmer bred this cow, and it's the same for a product, a vegetable in agriculture. But when I'm using a bag of flour, then there's nothing about traceability. And I think the industrial sector could do it in the future. We should start working on traceability of the flour. If we don't do this, the customers of the craft bakeries will go to the industrial bakeries. So I hope that some people will hear that.
Thank you. You said you're shy. I don't think so. What was interesting in your presentation, and that came back quite often, was the relationship between all the work you did upstream. And I tend to think as well that small grinding is a good match for your approach, and the gap effect in the shop to explain to the customers the pleasure of working, of the profession, to be able to explain. It's all starting to come together from the matrix of the product until the fermentation and the communication. I think we all agree here, and we all are complementary. Christian, I will give you the floor now. We need to stick with time, so we will listen to you now. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be with you today. I've been working for over 20 years with you. I'm trying to incite you to increase the nutritional value of bread, and I think I haven't been heard. I'm turning 80 soon, so if it takes another 20 years before we get to results, it's quite difficult. I started on TAT flour campaigns it didn't work very well, but we can't say it didn't have any influence. We see that the very white bread is not trendy anymore. We see that flour types have evolved. My second intervention was to say to bread ambassadors, you are doing it all wrong, we've got to change everything. So they've questioned me, and they have reviewed this method themselves by creating this Respect Spanish method. I don't understand that the Respect Spanish method is not taught. This is a real scandal for me. What are you waiting for to go and make a scandal, a fight for this? I don't understand. Maybe we can discuss later. I'm not going to stop now. I want to tell you that we need to go further. We need to go to eat more highly nutritious breads. My first message is that wheat flour must lose its monopoly. White bread with only wheat flour is a dead end, nutritionally speaking, for several reasons. Because wheat flour only contains a low part of the components of a wheat grain, and because alone wheat cannot nourish fully consumers. Wheat needs other grains to make a well-balanced bread. So the nutritional balance of bread needs a mix of grains. If I see 100% wheat bread, I know it's not the bread that I need. And Thomas Planchot explained that with only white flour, grain-enriched bread was having good effects on one of his consumers. How can we evolve? We need to understand that wheat has supremacy in bread because of the viscoelastic properties of its gluten. And despite the fact that baking strength has been multiplied by 2 or 3, the share of wheat flour has not decreased. It's not normal. It means that we need to add new ingredients. It is now possible to have a well-raised bread by replacing 20% of the wheat flour by additional grains. I know that there are a lot of grains. Bread, but that's maybe 10% of the composition. I suggest that we go further in this approach. There is now a great opportunity to produce bread that are highly nutritious breads. The future of bakery depends on its ability to make bread a whole food. I'm happy that the different speakers highlighted the role of sourdough. Indeed, the sour allows for predigestion of the grain's components. It stimulates hydrolytic activities by lowering the pH, and it strengthens intestinal health thanks to the microbiota, with prebiotic effects on the intestinal way of functioning. We've all heard the campaigns for probiotic products, etc., but bread is much more efficient because there are fibers in bread and they've been processed by the sourdough fermentation. So there is an improvement of the glycemic index of bread, and sourdough allows to create a new matrix coming from a diversity, a whole range of grains. So we destructure the grains, we create bread, and we create a new matrix, a bread matrix. There might be some slight difference in taste, depending on the grains. Bread allows consumers to consume different types of grains, 10, 20 different types of grains. It offers a great service for consumers. Depending on the techniques, a consumer can consume 10 to 15 different types of grain, which is amazing health-wise. We've heard about the 3V rules: true, varied, and vegetal. We are right on it here. We need to strengthen the role of pre-digestion of sourdough. We need, therefore, a high moisture of flours or flakes. And for this roll to be strong, we need to have a low inoculation, because that means creating a long-term enzyme incubation time. Because we only have fermentation when there is acidification. Only this technique of low inoculation and long fermentation can allow for a deep work on grains. A baker is a biochemist. He creates enzyme maturation of a dough. So we have hydrolase here, and we have many of them, and to bring different grains, increase the enzymatic hydrolysis. I had asked for a change on the slides. It's no big deal. We can also highlight that sourdough strengthen the effects of plant enzymes because it has almost all plant enzymes with maybe different properties sometimes. What's going on? It's okay now. How can we make bread from these grains? So add them to the flour? I don't think it's relevant. So we need to first have pre-digestion and pre-fermentation of grains. And this replaces the cooling phase of a conventional sourdough. This replaces this step. And in the final step of bread making, the proportion of sourdough can be high, and this will allow for a fast fermentation. Amandio Pimenta suggests to ferment the wheat flour with yeast, and to have fermentation with sourdough for grains. In any case, we need to have low inoculation. We should always do that with low fermenting agents. So to apply this process, it is to moisture bran. For a long time, I have heard that we have to use whole flours with sourdough, yes, but it's better to have a different treatment for bran in comparison to flour, because bran needs a high moisture, over 300%. Bran can be fermented for 24 to 48 hours. We don't even need to add yeast after 48 hours, under 48 hours. I need some water, please. So it's interesting nutritionally and economically. So I don't understand in bakeries why we don't always have a pot of fermented bran to use to production. So how can we associate grains? This is the art of bakery. It is to assemble things. You know that in wine, we wouldn't have great wines if vineyards could not make great assemblies. It's the same for bread. We need to create assembling, nutritionally, and to do the best for the environment. So we need to assemble grains, and we let then the grains do their work. Which grains to use? We need to use cereals, lentils, peas. I don't understand why bread cannot adapt to local resources, for example. Knowing that legumes with their acid are additional. Amino acids are complementary and must be incorporated in bread. There's one legume that's produced in the southwest, very often organic. It's soy. Soy is extremely rich in fatty fats and proteins, and can be used in bread making. So we can assemble all different types of grains. We can also diversify, make blends, what I call granny pain. But you need to look for the best blends possible to have highly nutritious breads.
so we need to find the most economic formulations and the most appreciated ones at the digestive level. So it is up to us to see what is working for your customers, but you should also clearly display the high nutritional value goal. You have to explain that these breads are new, that it is a new concept, and that it will change the world of bakery. You have to communicate about the importance of pre-digestion of the sourdough. I'm repeating myself again. You have to make a difference between traditional white bread and high nutritious breads. For instance, by writing the increased percentage in fibers, in minerals, and in micronutrients in comparison to white breads. So these high nutritious breads can also allow us to reduce the quantity of salt. We can use very low quantities of salt in comparison to the traditional method. Bakery must have a nutri-ecological readability. That is to say that it has to privilege short circuits. It has to look for bread making modes that are energy efficient. And above all, it has to favor agroecology. That is to say, by asking the agricultural sector for grains and wheats, for crops rotations, so that it's more logical on the nutritional aspect and also on the planet aspect. You should also highlight the great interest of these new sorts of breads that have a great impact on the gut microbiota. The goal of nutri-ecology is to have global benefits for human health and the planet health. So you have to show this perspective. The perspectives are very exciting. We have the possibility to make bread a whole food. So we have to show the interest of the diversification of grains, of the sourdough predigestion and the complementarity of grains. It is still difficult to recommend. It would then be easy to recommend a doubling of the actual bread consumption, but we will have to find the right way to mobilize this and to make sure that the bakers can adopt this keen path. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much for this presentation about the new perspectives we can use for breads, for formulations. I think it is now time for Amandio to take the floor. We have little time. Most of what I am going to say will go back to what the different presenters just said. Since I knew I would do the conclusion, I decided to tell you about a general vision, to let you know specifically about a few examples, because the topic is baking techniques for health nutrition. We understood that it is not necessary only to assemble ingredients. It's not enough. We have to implement new techniques that have been described by my fellow speakers. I'm sorry I cannot see very well. I don't have my glasses. First of all, an observation. The food world of empty calories is making progress. It's obvious. Everyone is talking about that. All the different stakeholders talk about this regularly. We have high problems of health, public health in France. There is the development of disease linked to this diet imbalance. We have more than 4 million people suffering from diabetes in France. 1 out of 5 French persons suffering of cholesterol detrimental effects, and bread can have an impact on that. About 1/3 of French people have high blood pressure, and we should not forget the Suvimax studies results that have shown deficiencies in nutrients and micronutrients for most of French people, in magnesium and omega-3, for instance. With respect to Spanish, we have possibilities to bring fibers and then thus other nutrients and minerals. 100% of women have magnesium deficiencies and 70% of men have magnesium deficiencies. Omega-3 are also a striking example. Almost all adults do not have enough omega-3, and this is leading to cardiovascular disease, for instance. In France, we have craft bakers, 4 main stakeholders. We have the craft bakers, the nutritionists, GPs, and specialists, doctors. We have the journalists and the media that inform us, and we need to transmit this information to the general public, because the consumers need to have some information about that. So we are responsible. Altogether, if we add up all the different difficulties in terms of health, disease that French people have, we notice that 40 million French people out of 70 million people have issues, health issues. So as bakers, we have a societal responsibility. If we can bring some answers, we have almost a moral obligation to do so, or a society obligation to do so. So these aspects are very important. Facing the situation, we have to find a synergy and the action of the different stakeholders and prescriptors for the good of society. In craft work in general, there are lots of studies that are carried out in separate ways, but very few that are done collectively for the interest of the society and the consumer. These sectors are working independently and communicate very little. It is essential to make people collaborate together and spread information about the progress of knowledge to be more efficient towards the public authorities, the consumers, and the patients. I know that many diets are deleting the consumption of bread, but there is no nutritional reason to do so if the consumption is reasonable, the daily consumption. We reach that point because there is a lack of information among the medical sector. If you go to a GP, a normal GP, and you ask them a question about bread, they won't be able to answer because they haven't been trained about that. It's also our fault because we did not do our informative job. In this framework, I've just described, I must say that in the 18 last years, the bread ambassadors have committed to raise awareness of the industry and to transmit this knowledge that Sylvain and Thomas have described earlier towards the professionals, the apprentices, and companies as well. So we are helping them with supporting the implementation of new practices. So this is background work. We have also committed to take into account the nutritional allegations as a factor of economic development and as concrete solutions for the consumer and the nutritional and medical world to be quite inclusive. Why? Because at the moment in France there are about 230 nutritional allegations, and the bakery world has many. On the European level, we have about 4,000 demands for allegations transmitted by the states and more than 1,000 being studied. So we can see that this is a research field that is huge in terms of health and sanitary products. As craft bakers, we have to be informed about this. And we have to integrate these figures into our collective thinking. We are invited by research and development in terms of bread and flours. We want to support local circuits and use local grains and gather the international knowledge through the World of Bread contests, especially for the Health Nutrition Prize, to which more than 20 countries are regularly taking part in. Every 2 years, in that contest, there is a health nutrition prize. Each country is making a lot of efforts to find information, to get knowledge, and to transmit it through a bread that is displayed at the competition. So it's a great R&D work. And then when we gather all this information, this is great for us, for jobs, and for the consumers as an end. Gradually, we formalized and we did it by writing in several technical books of the Respectus Panis series. This has been translated into several languages, and this is a common thread to transmit the know-hows in the different countries and towards the different stakeholders, companies or professionals. The end is always the consumer and the well-being of the consumer. Through this considerable work, the bread ambassadors have placed the bread at the very core of the diet nutrition balance. In the 20 years that followed the 30 glorious years, bread has become an ersatz of bread. We were talking about bread as food and craft bread. Bread has to be something that brings nutrients. Industrial bread is just a product because there are very different approaches in terms of nutritional assets between both sorts. So the bread is at the center of the diet. So we put it back at the center of the nutritional balance of the meal, and it's the whole food portions that are revisited. So this is the fundamental vision of the Respectus Panis method. We have to legitimate the true value of bread as food. It should never have lost that. To help us with these goals, we have Christian, who was a whistleblower. He helped us a lot. And we cannot do, as technicians, we cannot do anything without scientists, and scientists cannot do anything without technicians. So that is thanks to this collaboration that we've made great progress. So a few words to say what bread can bring us. It can seem obvious, but it's not always the case. And we can have different perspectives, opinions. If we have a real exchange between with each other, we know that it can bring some minerals, some fibers, magnesium, trace elements, omegas 3, 6, and 9. We need to eat about 2 grams of fatty acids per day. It's essential for the heart, for the development of the brain. And we all have deficiencies because we are not eating a lot of fish, because our animals are bred intensively. So we have deficiencies in omega-3s, 6 and 9, but we need to eat them because our body cannot synthesize them. That is why we need to use seeds such as flax, sunflower. And I think, according to the analysis, a baguette of bread of 100 grams contains 1.2 grams of omega-3. 1.02 grams of omega-3, sorry. So it doesn't mean that you will eat only bread, but this is a good basis. Bread also contains all the essential amino acids that are essential to metabolism in general and to the protein metabolism. We never talk about proteins from the nutritional point of view, but only from the technical point of view. From the technical point of view, I started making bread in 1974 when we were reaching 100 W strength gluten. It was great. And this is great to integrate legumes because they will stand the bread making process. So high quality proteins and the 9 amino acids that will start the protein metabolism. And these medium quality proteins will become great quality proteins thanks to the work of the amino acids. There are also antioxidants, polyphenols, if we are including fruit. And there's also something that is extraordinary. And I know there has not been any study about that yet, so I have to be cautious. We have polysaccharides and exopolysaccharides that are essential for the gut microbiota.
So, nutritionally speaking, regarding processed foods, there are 2 things to take into account. It was the 4 elements that I mentioned initially. There are 2 very different things. First of all, the composition of raw materials in nutritional elements. We need to have them. The quality of raw materials. Then we have, technically speaking, the optimized implementation. If we have a good recipe but with a bad implementation, it won't work as bad. If you over-knead, then you will lose proteins. So technique is very important. We will see it for glycemic index. The same for sourdough. It's very interesting to find the right level, because what we have learned yesterday is not necessarily our truth today, and it will not be the same in the future because research is ongoing, so things are always changing. But today, we all agree that the bioavailability, meaning the acidity stage with enzymes and phytic acid, because we find that we have a pH of 4.6, maybe 5.2. We all agree on the range anyway. We shouldn't go too far with the acidity. We can if we want, but what we see is that if there is too much acidity with all different foods in the stomach, can also have an antioxidant effect. So we need to have more knowledge to create certainty. Oh, sorry, I know I need to stick with time. So technique is very important. To be efficient, technique goes with the composition, and this goes both ways. Just one example, because we are not doing a course here, but just to illustrate. For example, for the glycemic index, we are all different, depending on our metabolisms. Foods will have a different impact on our bodies. We have 4 technical leverage to lower the glycemic index. The choice of flour, for example. If you take lupine or buckwheat, for example, it will not have the same glycemic index as wheat. This is extremely important for people who suffer from diabetes. The second leverage is fermentation, a complete fermentation. Then the flour particle size, the bigger the particles, the more time it will need to digest, and it will smoothen the glycemia peaks. If you have a flour that is well ground, very finely ground, or not, this will create differences. And then kneading. And Respecto Spanish is very good for that, because we do not separate starch from gluten. And in flour, they are together. If you separate them during the kneading, then the starch will be digested very quickly, and it will increase the glycemic index. For example, the white bread baguette has a much higher glycemic index as the tradition baguette. So thanks to the technique, the baking techniques, we can do our best for people who suffer from diabetes. So the reversed method, I will move very fast on this. A long fermentation can bring us to an Ehrlich pathway, which is well known in viticulture, and this creates an incomparable preservation of bread. In this reversed method, we push the fermentation of the secondary sugars very far. We have much more than what's needed for bacteria and yeast, so this will stick to the final product. This might prevent the glycemic index to be as reduced as possible, as low as possible, because the polysaccharides are recombining, but it's very good for our gut microbiota. There are many things we can study and explore in our professions. It's really exciting for us and for our customers. Experts, I will pass that very fast. We all know that we have very good and qualified people in all different fields. We have scientists, for example, at the INRA, private, public. We have universities, many people who've done thesis on bread. We can find a lot of information. These skills and and that's why we are here today, is that we never work in synergy. We never work with all these different skills to create very high nutritional value bread, bringing pleasure and wellness to the consumer by preserving the health capital at mid and long term. Publicly, in organized professions, we don't do it, but industrials do it, and craft bakers do it too. For example, there is a bread that has a nutritional allegation that says that it maintains and reduces the cholesterol rate. In the baking world, you can do that. You can create bread that for 100 grams, in terms of protein quality, we are nearly as we nearly have as much as in meat, as 100 grams of meat. There are many labels. Projects and trademarks are being registered. So, for the future of our companies and our consumers, what's important to understand is that in the near future, in the way we design bread, we need to take into account public health. Bread can bring some solutions. It cannot fix all the issues. We must also integrate climate change. Respect Hispanis allows to produce very high nutritious bread with raw materials with the low energy and carbon costs, because I won't go into details. We are in this logic. So the need in new protein sources, we have to reduce our consumption of meat. We see that there are not as many fish in the sea as before. Bread can bring excellent quality products and with a better quality-price ratio because it's accessible.
As a conclusion, the bread ambassadors are here more than ever to keep federating voluntarily. All these partnerships transmit knowledge, richness, values, a philosophy for the general interest. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Amandio. We are now reaching the end of these presentations that have been very rich and complementary and all linked to meanings in terms of education, society, environment, formulation. What we should remember from this part before giving the floor to our first speaker is that this work needs a collaboration. These spaces for exchange have to be vulgarized. Everyone is working on their side, and we could go much further. Anthony, I think you finished your last roundtable. Maybe you can have the floor now. You didn't hear the other speakers, but I think there are maybe things that we could talk about because we could not hear you well. Can you give us some key messages? We don't have the sound. I think your mic is off. Sorry, thank you for giving me the floor back. I will be very brief. I'm switching from one meeting to the other. What is essential is to agree on what a healthy food is. We have to know that processed food do not make sense. A healthy food is a food that is not processed, that can be eaten, that is safe, that is good. So I think the best bread is the bread that is processed by respecting the raw materials. I like the word respect of the food processes. When it's not ultra transformed under plastic, it's much better. So we have to stop producing low quality breads, industrial breads, and the best quality bread is the one that is little processed or processed in a soft way. Thank you very much. You wanted the floor? I wanted to suggest to make bread for which wheat flour is not the majority anymore. Or to have at least 15 to 20% of seeds or grains. From the time that bread is not only made of wheat, it opens great possibilities in terms of nutrition. So I would like to know if you are ready to commit to this path. Because it is not the first time I'm giving a speech and then I see that the bakers are not following. It was the case for the T80 flour. For me, this is a speech that is valid, that corresponds to everything that has been said in terms of health and nutrition. But are you ready to explore this path, to create assemblies that can reach to high nutritious breads? Are you ready? That was the conclusion. The biggest fear of bakers is that the bread won't be white breads anymore, and the higher consumption of bread is white bread, so they fear losing lots of customers. Christian Remesi told you about soy. With 5% soy in a baguette, we can value the quality of proteins. We can value the bread. It doesn't change the taste of the bread. It stays white or cream colored. I've done some trials and it worked really well. I didn't go to the very end of the process because soy is very fat, and in the proofing room it had a tricky impact. Please go ahead. I'm David Fèvre. I'm a craft baker in the Deux-Sèvres region. What is very interesting for me with the Respecto Spanish method is that I'm collaborating with Amandio Pimienta and a Togolese baker. There is a shortage in wheat in Togo because of the Ukrainian war, so they changed their method and followed Amandio's lead. So they're using cassava and corn. It boosted the culture of cassava, and this is a great economic boost for the country. So I invite you to have a look at YouTube and see the local Togolese flour with all the climate changes, they are also reinventing themselves. I would like to give the floor to my neighbor, who's the president of the Social Security Center in the region. Elisabeth Gauthier. I'm the president of Nathalie Gauthier, sorry, the president of the Social Security Center. I wanted to say that when I was invited to learn more about this method, I was very sensitive because in terms of health, we reimburse drugs, but we have lots of possibilities that are free because we buy our bread, and that could allow us to avoid medical issues, because when we're taking drugs, it's because we have issues of the microbiota. This is something I want to be working on for next years. The nutritional and health aspects linked to bread. I wanted to have all the elements and knowledge today to start actions with bakers and see how we can develop national campaigns or a charter so that some bakers start developing nutritional breads. Thank you very much. Let's go back to this. I think you all said yes to the question of Christian. There are many things we can do in order to rework the bread and to make it a sort of drug, if I may. But it's dangerous and it's very difficult to sell that to the consumer. We've had issues every time to explain things, to make them. It is very difficult to establish in the bakeries and according to the legislation. It is very tempting because we know that there are lots of keys in bread, nutritional keys, but it's more a general quality of bread that can solve problems, but I'm not sure it's the best approach to sell bread as a drug. I think bakers need science, but science to defend them. Today, if we do something, we will be criticized because people will say that what I'm saying is not true. The problem is that at the moment, the scientists are not defending us. In the future, we should have a different approach, and doctors should stop saying that we should stop eating bread. I know some of them are not saying this. I fully agree with what you are saying. We have lots of possibilities, but we have to be defended by medicine, by scientists, to prove our customers the good things about bread. And if we start doing it ourselves, there will be allegations. We won't be able to say what we want. There will be lobbies, industries, competition. And I would like to show my customers that bread is healthy without having any issues, without having to prove it. I think we are ready, but maybe the consumer is not ready for it. As long as the consumers are not educated to nutrition, as long as they don't understand, then it won't work. That is why I am fighting for it. When the consumers understand what they are eating, they're eating better and everything is winning. I think we shouldn't say that science is the culprit. Science is telling you that you should make bread that is not 100% made of wheat. So we have to do it. Yes, it's about the notions of allegations. The difficulty will be to sell this product at the right price. So these are many things that we can work on. It is time for questions now, for those who wish to ask a question. Pierre? After this demonstration, I fully agree with you. And I'm very happy with the women's presentation, because it is thanks to that kind of studies that public authorities will be aware of what you have said. Everything that you have said is essential, and to make it applied by the craft workers is essential. When we see the number of white wheat baguettes that are sold every day, they should be replaced by good nutritious bread, but this cannot be done without the support of public authorities. So thank you very much. I hope you will be supported by the public authorities, and I will suggest a partnership with the bread ambassadors to my president. Thank you very much. Another question? I would like to add something that is not linked to health, but more to training. I was the president of jobs chambers, and what I wanted to change was the trainings, not only for bakers, for many fields. We are relying on referentials that have been existed for years that are not aligned anymore with our current needs. And this is a fight with political institutions at the national level. It is the national education that is creating the referentials. It is not the professionals that are creating the referentials. So we have a major issue with the national education. I know that some people won't be happy with what I'm saying, but I wanted to stress this. I think it is only thanks to your trade unions that and organizations that things can change.
Dominique? So to bounce back on what you just said, us bread ambassadors, we are more than convinced of what you just said. All the work we've done for the last 18 years show that we are convinced. You've talked about political infrastructures. We haven't heard back from them for 15 years. We are ignored. So when professional structures ignore those who want to push things forward, except if we manage to get the baguette at the UNESCO heritage level, we can't be heard. There's a lot of work to be done. And I think things will move slowly because we need to educate our consumers. That's a lot of stakeholders. But if us, craftsmen, if our confederation was with us, supporting us in what we are trying to put forward, it would be a great leap forward. I don't think that was a question. I just want to say that I understand the difficulties, but I think that each bakers can do a real step by having grains blends, for example. We already do it. You don't do 20%. That's not true. Yes, of course, a lot more than what you think. But we will continue, us ambassadors, to preach and to explain to people and that's why we are ambassadors. So to assure Christian, because I work in bakeries in every week, and I can tell you that the Ramsey method, the reversed method, the Respectus Panif method, all of this is convincing young bakers. I can tell you that many teachers teach young people because they are demanding it, they want it. I'm quite optimistic. Of course, Christian, it's not going as fast as needed because it could really explode, but we are moving forward. You were a pioneer, you still are. You're trying to steer the boat. We've not always agreed, but it's moving. Things are moving. I'm 64. I retired 6 years ago. I could have stayed at home enjoying fishing. I couldn't because I enjoy and I'm passionate about baking. That's why I can tell you, I guarantee you that it is working. We will now conclude. We will thank all the speakers who have done great presentations, and we wish you a great end of the day.
Donc, le cocktail est servi dans la salle restaurant.